She was on her knees in the supply closet, pressing a wad of gauze against a gash on her own palm, when the windows on the east wing blew inward. Not cracked, not rattled. Blew, a concussive percussion that sent glass raking across the linoleum in the corridor outside, and every light in the emergency department flickered twice before the backup generators kicked with a deep mechanical groan. Emma Blake heard shouting next. Not patient shouting, not the controlled urgency she'd grown numb to over 18 months at Redwood Valley Medical Center. This was different. Boots, radio static, a specific cadence of movement she hadn't heard since a life she'd mostly stopped thinking about. She wrapped her hand, tucked the gauze, and opened the supply closet door. 8 helicopters. She couldn't see them yet, but she could count them by sound. The overlapping rotor wash, the staggered approach pattern, the way the noise built in layers rather than all at once. Whoever was landing outside knew what they were doing. "Blake!" Dr. Nathan Cross was already in the corridor, his face doing the thing it did when he was angry and wanted someone to blame for it. "What the hell is happening out there? Why aren't you at the trauma bay?" "I was restocking sutures," she said. "You asked me to." "I asked you an hour ago. Where have you been?" She didn't answer that. There wasn't a version of the truth that would satisfy him, and anything she invented would only prolong the conversation. She moved past him toward the ambulance bay, and he followed, because that was what he did. He followed, and then once he figured out what was happening, he'd position himself at the front of it and act like he'd been there first. The ambulance bay doors opened onto organized chaos. 3 black military vehicles had pulled into the lot, and personnel in tactical gear were establishing a perimeter along the fence line. A medical transport helicopter, not military spec, but close, was setting down in the far lot where the overflow parking usually sat empty on Tuesday nights. Emma stopped walking. She recognized the patch on the nearest operator's shoulder. Not the unit, that was obscured, which was deliberate, but the color sequence. Olive, black, narrow gold stripe. She hadn't seen that combination in 3 years, and she'd spent a significant portion of those 3 years trying to forget it existed. "What is this?" Cross said behind her. "Someone call the administrator. Someone call—" He looked around for a nurse or a tech to delegate to. His gaze landed on Emma. "Blake, call Dr. Mercer's office." "It's 11:40 at night," she said. "Then wake him up." She pulled out her phone. She didn't dial Mercer's office. She stood very still and watched the operator nearest the fence line turn and scan the faces gathered at the ambulance bay entrance. His scan was professional, methodical. When it reached her, it stopped. He spoke into his radio. Emma looked down at her phone. "Blake." Cross again. "Are you calling?" "Calling," she said, and pressed the phone to her ear and listened to it ring and watched the operator in her peripheral vision detach from the fence line and walk toward the entrance with a second operator falling in behind him. Mum. Her name at Redwood Valley was Emma Blake. On her employee badge, on her tax forms, on the apartment lease she'd signed 18 months ago with a first and last month and a prayer that nothing would go wrong. She was 29 years old. She had a nursing degree from a state university she'd attended after completing her service. And she had 18 months of emergency department experience, and she had a reputation among the staff as quiet, competent, and forgettable. Dr. Nathan Cross had called her a glorified bedpan technician on her 3rd day. He'd said it to another attending, not to her directly, but the ED wasn't a large space and sound carried, and she'd heard it clearly while changing an IV line 6 feet away. She hadn't said anything. She'd finished the IV and moved to the next patient and let the comment settle somewhere in the back of her mind where she kept the things that didn't matter enough to respond to. That category had gotten crowded over the past 18 months. "You don't flag complex cases," Cross had told her in October, during a shift debrief that was really just him listing her failures in front of 2 other nurses. "You treat everything like it's routine." "The cases I flagged were routine," she'd said. "That's not your determination to make. I have a nursing license. Triage assessment is literally your support staff, Blake. You support the physician assessment. You don't make independent calls." She hadn't pushed it. She'd looked at her notes and said nothing, and Cross had interpreted the silence as submission, which was what he wanted, so she'd given it to him. The other nurses had opinions about this. Jolene Watts, who'd been at Redwood Valley for 11 years and had seen 4 trauma chiefs come and go, had cornered Emma in the break room in November and said, "You know you're better than him, right?" "I'm a nurse," Emma had said. "He's a physician. It's not really a comparison." "That's not what I mean." Emma had poured her coffee and not elaborated, because elaborating would have required explaining things she wasn't going to explain. The job had been a choice, a deliberate, considered choice made by someone who needed invisible work in a high-acuity environment. Emergency nursing was the closest civilian analog to what she'd done before. The pace was familiar. The stakes were familiar. And nobody in a busy emergency department looked too closely at the quiet nurse who showed up on time and never called in sick and mostly kept to herself. It had worked for 18 months. The operator knocked on the glass door of the ambulance bay entrance. Not a polite knock, a cop knock. 3 hard raps that said, "We are coming in whether you open this or not." Cross looked at Emma like she was supposed to handle it. She opened the door. The operator was maybe 35, with a jaw that had taken some hits and eyes that were doing rapid, continuous environmental assessment even while he was looking directly at her. He had a name tape on his plate carrier, but it was covered with black adhesive. "Ma'am," he said, "we're looking for a staff member, Emma Blake." "That's me," she said. He didn't react, just continued looking at her with that flat assessment expression. Then he said very quietly, so that Cross behind her couldn't hear, "Specter-Seven." Her stomach dropped 6 inches. Her face did not move. "What's this regarding?" she said, in a normal voice, the way she'd say it to any law enforcement contact. "We need you outside," he said. "We have a situation developing and we've been directed to you." "She's on shift," Cross interrupted, stepping forward. He'd been listening. Of course he had. "She has patients. You can't just—" "Who authorized this? What agency are you?" "Sir," the operator said, with the specific kind of politeness that was really a warning, "this doesn't involve you. This is my emergency department. Everything in it involves—" "Nathan!" The voice came from behind them. Dr. Patricia Lund, the overnight administrator, had appeared at the corridor junction. She was 61, had been managing this hospital for 14 years, and had the look of someone who had just been on the phone with someone who had frightened her. "Let them through." Cross turned. "Patricia, they're pulling one of my nurses in the middle of—" "Let them through," she said again. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. Outside, in the cold Colorado air, the situation revealed itself in pieces. The helicopters had landed in the industrial park half a mile north. Emma could see their lights through the trees. The perimeter team was 12 people, which was more than she'd initially assessed. She'd missed 4 who were positioned behind vehicles. The medical transport helicopter was still running, rotors idling, which meant they were planning to lift again soon. The operator led her to one of the black vehicles. The rear door opened from inside, and a woman stepped out. "Colonel." Emma read the insignia before she read the face. Then she read the face. Diane Marsh. She'd aged, her hair was shorter, and there were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. And she was wearing a look that Emma associated with people delivering news they didn't want to deliver. "Blake," she said. "Colonel, I won't insult you by asking how you've been. Probably smart." Marsh looked at the hospital building. "We have a problem. Multiple problems, technically. And they've converged tonight in a way that nobody predicted, which is embarrassing given that we had a lot of very expensive people doing predictive modeling." "What's coming?" "Refinery explosion. 30 minutes north. Vantage processing. You know it?" "I've driven past it. It went up 40 minutes ago. We have early casualty reports that suggest this hospital is about to receive somewhere between 40 and 60 severely wounded civilians. Burns, blast injuries, structural trauma. And we have a complication." Emma waited. Sergeant First Class Dominic Rell was in the area, undercover. He was caught in the blast. Marsh paused. "He's being transported here. He's critical." Emma kept her expression even. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Rell was part of your unit, and because the attending trauma physician at this hospital—" Marsh checked a tablet she was holding. "One Dr. Nathan Cross has a history in our files that suggests he is not equipped for what's coming tonight. That's not my assessment to give." "I'm not asking for your assessment. I'm telling you what ours is." Marsh lowered the tablet. We need someone in that trauma bay who can manage Rel's injuries. His presentation is going to be unlike anything a civilian trauma team has seen, and I need someone he trusts." Emma looked at the hospital. The lights in the ED were visible through the glass. The controlled brightness of fluorescence, the movement of people behind the windows. She could see Cross through the glass, gesturing at someone, his body language already elevated. "I'm a nurse," she said. I can't supersede physician authority. We're not asking you to supersede anything. We're asking you to be present." "And if Cross makes a call that's going to kill Rel?" Marsh said nothing. "That's what I thought," Emma said. She looked at the helicopter. "How long?" Rel lands in approximately 12 minutes. The mass casualty wave hits the ED in 20 to 25. Emma did the math. It wasn't good math. "Okay," she said. "What?" She went back inside with the operator one step behind her, and she found the ED already beginning to transform. The radio had crackled with the mass casualty alert while she was outside, and Jolene Watts was at the charge nurse station pulling up the disaster protocol, and two of the overnight techs were repositioning equipment to clear the trauma bays for volume. Cross was on the phone. He saw Emma come in and held up a finger, a wait gesture, dismissive, and continued his call. She went to the supply room and started pulling items. She didn't think consciously about what she was grabbing. Her hands knew. Chest seals, a thoracic needle kit, hemostatic gauze, tourniquet stock, airway supplies beyond what the standard trauma cart carried. She was building a kit that didn't exist in civilian emergency protocols, and she was doing it fast because she had 11 minutes. "What are you doing?" Jolene appeared in the doorway. "Setting up. We have standard mass cal carts these are for one patient specifically." Emma didn't slow down. "The military transport landing in about 10 minutes is bringing a critically wounded soldier. His injuries are going to be blast pattern. The standard cart isn't going to be enough." Jolene was quiet for a moment, then, "How do you know that?" "Because someone told me." Another pause. "The people outside told you?" "Yes." Jolene looked at the items Emma had assembled. She was a good nurse. She'd been a good nurse for 11 years. Emma could see her doing the assessment. The specific items, the configuration, the implied clinical logic behind each choice. "What do you need from me?" Jolene said finally. "Keep Cross away from Trauma Bay 2 until the patient is stable." "Emma, he's the trauma chief. I can't just—" "Do what you can." Emma picked up the kit. "That's all I'm asking." Cross found her in Trauma Bay 2-3 minutes later. "What is this?" He gestured at the setup she'd built. "Who authorized you to pull from the restricted supply stock?" "You need to open all trauma bays," Emma said. "We have a mass cal inbound, 40 to 60 patients." "I'm aware of the mass cal. I'm managing the mass cal. What I'm asking is why you're in here with supplies that aren't on any standard protocol list." "The military transport is bringing a critical patient, blast injuries. I wanted to be prepared." "You wanted?" He said it like it was a foreign concept. "Blake, you are not the clinical lead on anything. You don't prepare independently. You execute what I direct. Do you understand?" She looked at him. He was wound tight, tighter than usual. His jaw was working, and there was a sheen on his forehead that wasn't entirely from the heat of the building. She'd seen this before, the elevated affect in a physician who could feel something big coming and wasn't sure they could handle it. The ego response was to compress control, to make everyone smaller so the space felt manageable. "Yes," she said. "Good. Leave the setup, it's fine, but you're in Bay 1 with the civilian intake. That's where I need you." "Understood." She stayed in Bay 2. He left because he had 15 other things demanding his attention, and because he'd said his piece and expected compliance, and compliance was the only version of her he'd ever registered. The transport landed at 11:58. Emma heard it before she saw it, the rotor wash hitting the rooftop vent, that distinctive pressure change. Then the automatic doors opened, and two operators came through with a litter between them, moving fast, and behind them a flight medic who was doing compressions with one hand and managing an IV line with the other. Dominic Rell was 36 years old. She'd last seen him at a forward operating base in a country she wasn't going to name before everything went wrong. He'd had a full beard then, and a running joke about her clinical efficiency and a habit of tapping his left knee when he was nervous. He was on his back now with blast burns across his left side and a tension pneumothorax building. She could see the tracheal deviation from 6 feet away. "Bay 2, she said, moving to take one handle of the litter. "We need a physician," one of the operators said. "Not aggressive, just procedural. I'm what's available right now," Emma said. "Move." They moved. She got him to the bay and the flight medic gave her the handoff in clipped professional shorthand. Bilateral blast trauma. Penetrating injury to left chest, tension pneumo building, unstable pelvis. He'd had 2 liters pushed in flight and his pressure was still not where it needed to be. When did he lose consciousness? About 9 minutes ago. He's been in and out. She had the needle in her hand before she'd consciously decided. 14 gauge, second intercostal space, midclavicular line. She found the landmark by feel, not by looking. She was watching his face, watching the color, watching the rise of his chest. She advanced the needle and heard the rush of air, and Rel's chest rose more symmetrically. His blood pressure ticked up on the monitor. She was placing the flutter valve seal when she became aware of Cross in the doorway. "Blake." His voice was very quiet. "Step away from the patient." She didn't. "Blake." His pressure was 60 over palp, tension pneumo. I decompressed it. She kept her hands moving. "He's stabilizing." "You performed a needle thoracostomy." "Yes." "You are a registered nurse. You do not have authority to—" "Dr. Cross." One of the operators stepped forward, not threatening, just occupying space. "This patient is a federal asset. Our operational medical officer has cleared this practitioner to render care." Cross looked at the operator. He looked at Rel on the table. He looked at the monitor, where the blood pressure was reading 78 over 50 and climbing. He looked at Emma. She was already moving to the next problem. The first civilian ambulance hit the bay at 12:04, then 2 more, then 4. By 12:15, Redwood Valley's emergency department was receiving patients faster than it had receiving capacity, and the triage area had moved to the parking lot by necessity, and Cross was somewhere in the middle of it all, trying to direct traffic with a radio in each hand and the specific energy of a man who had prepared for a different kind of night. Emma stayed in Bay 2 with Rel until his pressure hit 90 systolic and held. The flight medic, whose name, she'd learned, was Specialist Tara Nguyen, was managing his airway with the practiced calm of someone who'd done this in worse conditions. Emma had stabilized the pelvis with what was available, which wasn't ideal, but it was enough. She was adjusting the IV rate when Rel's eyes opened. He looked at the ceiling, then he looked at her. His focus came in slowly, the way it did when the brain was still catching up with consciousness. She watched him look at her face. She watched the recognition happen. "Blake," he said. His voice was barely there. "Don't talk," she said. "You're in a hospital. You're stable." He grabbed her wrist. His grip was weak, nothing close to what it had been. But his eyes were clear. "They said you were dead," he said. "I know," she said. 3 years. "Dom, don't talk." He looked at her with an expression that had too many things in it to read quickly. Then his eyes went past her to the doorway, and his expression changed. Emma turned. Cross was standing there again, but he wasn't alone. Beside him was a man Emma didn't recognize. Civilian clothes, military bearing, the kind of face that had spent years learning to reveal nothing. He was looking at Rel with an intensity that didn't match the clinical concern of a bystander. He was looking at Rel like a problem he'd expected to be resolved by now. Emma's hand found the edge of the trauma cart. Rel's fingers tightened on her wrist. She looked back at him, and his eyes said something that his voice couldn't manage yet, and what they said turned the cold she'd been feeling since the helicopters landed into something sharper. Outside, another ambulance screamed into the bay. The lights flickered. Somewhere in the corridor, something, a cart, a monitor, a body, hit the floor. And the man in civilian clothes took one step into Trauma Bay 2. The man in civilian clothes took one step into Trauma Bay 2, and Emma moved before she'd consciously decided to. Not toward him. She wasn't stupid. She stepped sideways, positioning herself between him and Rel's litter, and she picked up a chart clipboard from the trauma cart and held it the way you hold something when you want your hands occupied and your posture readable as professional rather than defensive. "This bay is restricted," she said. The man looked at her the way people look at furniture they're deciding whether to move. "I'm here to check on the patient." "Are you his attending physician?" "No." "Are you family?" "No." "Then this bay is restricted." She held eye contact. "Sir?" Cross stepped forward. "Blake, this is, he's with the hospital administration. He's been briefed on the military patient." "I wasn't briefed on him," Emma said. "You don't need to be briefed. I'm telling you, he's authorized." Behind her, she heard Rel's breathing, steady, the right rate, the needle decompression holding. The monitor beeped at a rhythm she could track without looking. His pressure was still climbing. She needed maybe 20 more minutes of stability before she could feel anything close to confident about his chest. She did not need this man in this room. "Dr. Cross," she said, "we have 30-plus patients in the ambulance bay right now. I need you out there directing triage. I need this bay sealed." She looked at the man. "For infection control." It was a thin excuse and everyone in the room knew it. The man smiled. It didn't reach anything above his mouth. "I'll come back," he said. He left. Cross gave Emma a look that promised a longer conversation later, then turned and went back toward the chaos in the main corridor. Emma let out a breath she'd been holding without realizing it and turned back to Rel. His eyes were open again, clearer this time. "Voss?" he said. She leaned down. "What?" "That man." He swallowed. It cost him something. "His name is Voss. He's connected to Hargrove's office." She didn't know that name. She'd been out of that world for 3 years, and she'd worked hard at the not knowing. "Who's Hargrove?" "Deputy Acquisitions, Pentagon." Rel's eyes were doing the unfocused drift that meant he was fighting to stay present. "Emma, the explosion tonight. It wasn't—" He stopped, swallowed again. "It wasn't an accident." She looked at him. "Dom, you need to conserve—" "It wasn't an accident," he said again, louder than he should have been. His hand found her arm again and gripped. "I was there because I was tipped. There's a drive, physical drive. Someone planted it at Vantage 3 weeks ago, and Hargrove's people have been trying to recover it before it surfaces. The explosion was— They blew the refinery to—" His monitor alarmed, heart rate spiking. She straightened and adjusted his IV and put a hand flat on his sternum. Not clinical, just human, the way her old flight medic instructor had taught her. You sometimes need to pull someone back from the edge of their own panic. "Stop," she said firmly. "Breathe. I hear you. Stop talking and breathe." He breathed. The monitor settled. In the corridor outside, someone was yelling for a crash cart. Down the hall, another ambulance had arrived. She could hear Cross's voice elevated above everything else, giving orders that were partially right and partially going to create bottlenecks. But that wasn't her problem right now. Rel was her problem. "The drive," she said quietly. "Where is it?" He looked at her. Something in his face shifted. Relief, maybe, that she was asking rather than dismissing. "On me," he said. "Vantage security vest. Left chest pocket, behind the trauma dressing." She reached carefully, found the pocket, found what was inside. Something small, hard, wrapped in a secondary waterproof seal. She palmed it without looking at it and slipped it into the pocket of her scrubs. "Okay," she said. "Don't let Voss eat." "I heard you." She adjusted his positioning. "He's not coming back in here." Specialist Nguyen returned from the supply run at 12:22, arms full, and stopped short when she saw Emma's expression. "What happened?" "Nothing yet," Emma said. "How's the ambulance bay?" "Full, overflowing." Nguyen set her supplies down. "They're triaging in the parking lot now. Lot of burns, some crush injuries. One guy came in with rebar through his shoulder. He was walking, which was impressive, but he'd lost a lot of blood." She paused. "The trauma chief is—" She chose her words. "Struggling. Define struggling. He sent 2 critical patients to the same bay. There's only one functioning surgical team tonight. He told one of the burn patients they'd have to wait in the corridor because he didn't have the bed space, but the patient was going into shock, and one of the other nurses had to—" Nguyen stopped. One of the other nurses caught it. Emma already knew who. Jolene. She's managing half the department by herself. Emma looked at Rel. His pressure was holding. His airway was clear. Gwen could monitor him. The flight medic was more qualified than anyone else in this building for that specific task. And Rel didn't need an intervention in the next 20 minutes. He needed stability and time. I need to go, Emma said. You've got him. I've got him, Nguyen said. Then quietly, before Emma reached the door, he told me. When he was in and out, he kept saying a name. Emma waited. He said Specter-Seven, said she'd come back. Gwen looked at her steadily. That mean anything to you? Emma pushed through the door. The main corridor of Redwood Valley's emergency department had become something between a triage ward and a traffic accident. Patients on gurneys lined both walls. 2 portable monitors had been pulled from storage and neither was properly calibrated. A burn patient, male, mid-40s, 2nd and 3rd degree across his upper body, was lying on a gurney with an IV running wide open and nobody watching him, which was wrong, which would eventually be very wrong if nobody course-corrected. Emma stopped at his gurney first, checked his rate, slowed the IV, flagged his chart with a red marker she pulled from her pocket. She moved down the corridor. A woman with a crush injury to her right hand was holding it against her chest and crying quietly. Not the loud crying of panic, the quiet kind that meant the pain had exceeded her capacity to react to it. Emma stopped, splinted the hand with what she could grab from the nearest cart, told her she'd be seen soon, which was true in the technical sense that everyone would eventually be seen. A child, maybe 8, was sitting in a chair with his hands wrapped in gauze and a blank expression that Emma recognized as dissociation. She crouched to his level. Hey, what's your name? He looked at her, didn't answer. Are you here with someone? Still nothing. She looked around and spotted a woman 20 feet down the corridor who had the same jaw structure as the kid and was craning her neck between conversations with a tech. Emma got a tech's attention and pointed. The tech understood and moved to reconnect them. She stood, kept moving. Cross was at the junction of the main corridor and the trauma wing, and he had 3 people talking at him simultaneously and was managing none of them effectively. He had a chart in each hand and a radio clipped to his coat that was broadcasting, and he wasn't listening to it. Dr. Cross, she said. He looked up. His face did the thing, the flash of irritation at being interrupted by her, specifically the lowest priority interruption in any room he occupied. Not now, Blake. Bay 4 has 2 critical patients, she said. They need to be split, and the surgical team needs to know that. I said not now. One of them is going to code if they don't. Blake. He stepped closer, lowered his voice, which was worse, somehow, than the volume. I need you to understand something. I am managing this situation. I have managed mass casualty events before. I need my support staff to execute what I direct and not offer commentary. Are we clear? She looked at him. She thought about Rel in Bay 2 and the drive in her pocket and the man named Voss who had smiled at her with no warmth in it. Bay 4, she said. Patient in the left bed. His sats are going to drop in the next 10 minutes. I need you to know that. She walked away before he could answer. Yeah. Bay 4 was exactly as bad as she'd predicted. She found Jolene already there, repositioning the patient in the left bed. A man in his 50s with blast injuries to his torso and the early respiratory pattern of someone whose lungs were deciding whether to keep cooperating. I flagged him 20 minutes ago, Jolene said. She wasn't talking to Emma specifically, just to the room, the way people do when they've been right and ignored for long enough that being right has stopped feeling like anything. What do you need? I need a physician who's paying attention. Jolene didn't look up. What I have is Cross rerouting the ambulance bay by himself and ignoring half the patients in here. Emma pulled gloves. Tell me his presentation. Jolene ran through it. She was good at handoffs, concise, sequenced, no editorializing. The patient had a blast injury to his lower left chest, 2 broken ribs that they'd confirmed on portable X-ray, and fluid in the left pleural space that was building toward a problem. He was 53, no significant cardiac history, sats at 91 and trending down. He needs drainage, Emma said. Yes. Has anyone called that? I called it to cross 40 minutes ago, he said to monitor. Emma looked at the patient. He was awake, watching her with the alert but exhausted expression of someone who understood that something was wrong with their body but had surrendered the details to people who were supposed to know what to do. Sir, she said, I'm Nurse Blake. I need to be honest with you. You have fluid building in your chest that's affecting your breathing. A doctor needs to drain it. I'm going to make sure that happens. He nodded. I figured it was something like that, he said. His voice was compressed, not enough air behind it. My name's Gerald. Gerald, you're going to be okay. Give me 5 minutes. She went to find Cross. She found him at the nurse's station on the phone. She stood in his eye line and waited. He glanced at her, glanced away, continued his call. She waited. He finished the call, started typing something on the terminal. She stayed in his eye line. What? He said without looking at her. Bay 4, left bed, hemothorax. He needs chest drainage now. I know about that patient. His SATs dropped to 89. Cross stopped typing. When? Just now. Jolene is with him. He was up and moving. She followed. He went to Bay 4 and examined Gerald with the focused attention he could produce when the number was alarming enough to cut through whatever else was in his head, and she watched him do it and thought, he's not incompetent. He's overwhelmed and he's proud, and he's been managing his overwhelm by managing everyone around him, and it's not working, and he knows it isn't working, and that knowledge is making him worse. But underneath all of that, he knew what a hemothorax looked like. He knew what to do. Get me a thoracostomy kit, he said. She already had it. He looked at her, didn't say anything, took the kit. She stepped back and let him work. The man named Voss appeared again at 12:47. Emma saw him from the nurse's station. He was at the far end of the corridor, moving with the unhurried confidence of someone who believed the space was already his. He wasn't headed for the main trauma area. He was headed for the restricted corridor that led to Trauma Bay 2. She moved. She was faster. She came around the corner ahead of him and turned and walked toward him, and he stopped. Restricted access, she said. I told you I'd be back. And I'm telling you again that this corridor is restricted. There's a mass casualty event in progress. Unauthorized personnel need to stay in the waiting area. He looked at her with the same flat assessment he'd had before. You're a nurse. Yes. You don't have authority to bar access to any part of this building. I have authority to maintain a clean corridor during a mass casualty response. I'm exercising it. He took a step forward. She didn't move. Miss Blake, he said, and the fact that he knew her name landed exactly the way it was supposed to. I understand you're doing your job. I'm asking you to step aside. And I'm asking you to produce a credential that gives you access to restricted patient areas. Hospital policy. Sir? He reached into his jacket. She tracked his hand. He saw her track it, and something shifted in his expression, something that might have been recalculation. He produced a business card, held it out. She looked at it. Department of Defense, Office of Acquisitions and Procurement. The name on it was Richard Voss, Deputy Director. She handed it back. I'll need to see a hospital-issued visitor badge. You can get one at the main desk. I'm not going to the main desk. Then I can't clear your access to this corridor. They looked at each other. Behind her, from Trauma Bay 2, she heard the monitor alarm spike and immediately resolve. Nguyen adjusting something, or Rel shifting position. Normal sounds. But Voss heard it too, and his eyes went to the door behind her. That patient is a matter of federal security, he said. Then I'd expect federal agents to arrive with proper credentials. She met his eyes. Do you have those? A long beat. We'll talk again, he said. He turned and walked back down the corridor. Emma stood where she was for a count of 5, then went back to the nurse's station and picked up the desk phone and dialed the extension for Colonel Marsh's contact number, which she'd memorized in the parking lot because that was what you did with things you needed to remember. The line picked up on the first ring. Marsh. It's Blake. There's a man named Richard Voss, DOD, Office of Acquisitions. He's in the hospital. A pause. Short, but the kind of short that meant the name was recognized. Copy, Marsh said. He's tried to access Rel's location twice. He knows the room. Copy. Do not let him near the patient. I need help with that. I'm sending someone inside. And I need to know. Emma kept her voice flat, kept it professional, kept it nurse-shaped. Rel told me something about the explosion. He said it wasn't accidental. Another pause. Longer. We know, Marsh said. He said Voss is connected to someone named Hargrove. Blake. Marsh's voice changed slightly. Still controlled, but the quality of it shifted. Where are you right now? Nurses' station, East Wing. Stay visible, stay in populated areas. Someone will reach you in 15 minutes. The line disconnected. Emma set the phone down. A tech was watching her from 6 feet away with the particular expression of someone who had heard the last 30 seconds of a conversation they couldn't interpret. Sorry, she said. Personal call. She went back to the corridor. Wasmossen. At 1 a.m, Redwood Valley's emergency department had absorbed 43 patients from the refinery explosion and was struggling to digest them. The surgical team had been in the OR for 90 minutes on a patient with internal bleeding, and there was a second patient waiting for that same OR, and a third who had been declared stable but whose stability Emma didn't trust. She moved continuously. She'd stopped thinking of it as choosing where to go. She went where the gap was, where the thing that was about to go wrong hadn't gone wrong yet. She changed dressings, managed IVs, coached a 22-year-old refinery worker through a panic attack that had been mischaracterized in his chart as a cardiac event. She caught a medication error on a burn patient. Someone had written the weight wrong, and the dose would have been wrong, and she corrected it and flagged it and moved on. Cross was managing the department with slightly more control than he'd had an hour ago, which meant either he'd found his footing or the volume had decreased enough that his organizational method was temporarily adequate. He hadn't spoken to her since the hemothorax. Jolene found her at 1:15 in the medication room. There's someone looking for you, Jolene said. Not the administrator, not the military people. Civilian, badge says he's with hospital security, but he's been talking to Voss. Emma stopped. Which one? The man from before. The one you blocked from the restricted corridor. Jolene's voice was steady, but her eyes were asking questions. Emma, what is happening tonight? She owed Jolene something. Jolene had been covering for her all night, managing what Emma couldn't manage from Bay 2, catching Cross's oversights with the quiet competence of someone who had decided it was more important to do the job than to be credited for it. She deserved more than deflection. There's a patient in Bay 2 who witnessed something he shouldn't have, Emma said. It was true, in the way that partial truths are true. There are people who want access to him. They're not who they say they are. Jolene absorbed this. The military people outside. Are they the good version of this? Yes. And the man with the DOD badge? No. Jolene nodded slowly. The security guard is in the main corridor. He's been watching the East Wing entrance. How long? Maybe 20 minutes. That was after Emma's call to Marsh, which meant either Voss had moved fast or the security guard had been in place before and she hadn't spotted him, which was a gap she didn't like. Can you get to Bay 2? Emma said. I can get anywhere in this building. Tell Nguyen, the flight medic, to keep the patient sedated. Light sedation. He needs to stay stable, but I don't want him talking to anyone who comes through that door. Jolene looked at her for a moment. You were something else before you were a nurse, weren't you? It wasn't a question. Emma didn't answer it. She found the security guard by finding where he was looking. You located a surveillance post by tracing the eye line. He was positioned at the corridor junction with a coffee cup he wasn't drinking from and a walkie-talkie he checked every 4 minutes. She watched him from the medication room doorway for 6 minutes and confirmed the pattern. The operator, Colonel Marsh, had promised arrived at 1:23. Emma spotted him before he spotted her. He came in through the ambulance bay in a set of dark green scrubs that were wrong in 3 small ways she cataloged automatically, and he moved through the crowded corridor with the same professional environmental scan the first operator had done outside. She stepped into his path. He clocked her before she reached him. Good. Blake, he said quietly. The security guard at the East Corridor Junction, she said, matching his volume. He's working with Voss. There may be more. We're aware of Voss. Our team is tracking him. He knows about the patient. He knows the room. We're moving the patient. She blinked. When? 20 minutes. We have a secondary medical facility we can... He's not stable enough to move. The operator's expression said he understood that and had already accounted for it, and the calculation had still landed on move. The threat level in this building has been elevated. Colonel Marsh has assessed that the risk of staying outweighs. Rel has a partial pneumothorax, a pelvic fracture, and he's been in hemodynamic instability for the past 2 hours. Moving him in 20 minutes in anything short of a fully equipped surgical transport is going to kill him. She kept her voice even. I need 40 more minutes. I can give you 25. 30. He considered her for 3 seconds. 28. Fine. She turned and walked fast toward Bay Tucha Toriyasa. She almost made it. She was 10 feet from the door when the lights went out. Not a flicker. Full loss. Immediate. The corridor dropping to emergency red from the backup lighting along the floor. From somewhere in the building came a heavy mechanical sound, something between a thud and a groan, and then the generators kicked in, but not fully. Main lighting didn't return, and several of the monitors she could hear from the corridor dropped off and rebooted. Someone screamed. Not in pain. Surprise. Then she heard glass breaking. She moved through the red-lit corridor at speed, one hand on the wall, counting doors by feel until she reached Bay 2. She pushed through. Nguyen was on her feet. Rel's monitor was on backup power and reading. The room was intact. But the window, the small, reinforced window on the exterior wall, had a crack in it. Not a break. A crack. Like something had impacted it from outside. Emma went to the window and looked out. The parking lot lights were off. In the darkness, she could make out shapes. 2 vehicles that hadn't been there before, positioned near the fence line. And near the building's exterior, almost directly below the window, 2 figures in dark clothing moving fast along the wall. They're outside, she said. How many? Nguyen asked. At least 2. Possibly more in the vehicles. From down the corridor, she heard Cross's voice escalate. Not his normal elevated register, but something higher, something she'd describe as afraid. And then another sound. Underneath it. Not shouting, not equipment, footsteps. Many of them, moving in formation. She turned from the window. Get him ready to move, she said. Whatever you need. 5 minutes. I thought you said 40. I said 40. I have 5. She looked at Rel. He was semi-conscious, his eyes at half-mast, and the monitor was reading vitals she could work with. He was not ready to move. He was less not ready than he'd been an hour ago. That would have to be enough. Do it! She pushed back out into the corridor. The east wing door opened. The security guard who'd been watching it was gone. She noted that and kept moving. At the main corridor junction, she could see Cross backed against the nurse's station with his arms at his sides and an expression she'd never seen on him before. He was looking at 3 armed figures who had come through the ambulance bay entrance. Not military. The gear was wrong. The entry pattern was wrong. These were not Marsh's people. One of them spoke into a radio. He used a frequency designation Emma recognized from a completely different context, a dead context, a context that had no business being in a civilian hospital in Hawthorne, Colorado. Then he turned and his flashlight swept the corridor and it stopped on her face. Behind her, from Bay 2, Rel's monitor alarmed. The flashlight held on her face for 2 seconds. Long enough to confirm, long enough for the man holding it to relay something into his radio that she couldn't hear from this distance. She didn't run. Running was the wrong read of the situation. These men had come in through the ambulance bay, which meant they dealt with whatever security existed at that entry point, which meant they were committed and organized and had already done their threat assessment. Running would tell them she was a threat worth pursuing. Standing still would give her 4 more seconds to think. She used the 4 seconds. Cross was against the nurse's station, not moving, doing the frozen animal thing that people did when armed strangers appeared in spaces that were supposed to be safe. 2 nurses she didn't know well were behind him. A tech had dropped behind the station desk. Down the corridor to her left, she could hear patients, some aware, some not. The ambient noise of a ward full of people who had no idea what had just walked in. The man with the flashlight started toward her. She turned and walked, not ran, back toward Bay 2. She needed 30 seconds and a door between her and him. She got 20. He caught up at the Bay 2 entrance, put a hand on the door frame ahead of her and said, "Stop." She stopped, turned, looked at him. He was mid-30s, professional posture, the kind of face that gave nothing away by design rather than by nature. His gear was commercial, not military surplus, not law enforcement issue. Private. Expensive. The radio on his vest was encrypted capable. "Where's the patient?" he said. "There are 43 patients in this facility," she said. "You know which one." She looked at him steadily. "I need to see authorization." He almost laughed. It wasn't a friendly, almost laugh. The door to Bay 2 opened from inside. The Marsh operator, the one in wrong-cut scrubs, stepped out with his hand already at his side in a way that wasn't casual, and for 3 seconds the corridor was a geometry problem with a lot of bad answers. "Federal asset," the operator said. "This corridor is restricted." The private contractor looked at him, looked at Emma, looked at the door behind her. His radio crackled. He listened to something she couldn't hear. His posture shifted. A small change, the kind that meant he'd received a new instruction and was recalculating. He stepped back. "Your choice," he said to Emma. It wasn't a concession. It was a postponement. He turned and walked back toward the main corridor. Emma looked at the Marsh operator. "We're out of time," he said. "I know." Moving Rel was a controlled disaster, and Gwen had done what she could, adjusted his IV, secured his airway, fashioned a pelvic binder from what was available, which was not the right equipment for the job but was better than nothing. His pressure was holding at 88 systolic, which was the number Emma had been watching all night like a stone wall between him and the edge. They got him onto the portable gurney, and Emma kept one hand on his IV line and one eye on his monitor, and they moved through the back corridor, the one that ran along the exterior wall, service access, usually used for equipment transport. The operator was ahead of them. Gwen pushed. Emma navigated. Halfway down the corridor, Rel opened his eyes. "Emma," his voice was a wreck. "The drive." "I have it." "They'll know you have it." "I know." "There's a name on it, Beyond Hargrove." He was working hard to stay coherent. His color was wrong, not catastrophically wrong, but trending the direction she didn't want. Voss's logs are on there, transfer records. The refinery was insured through a subsidiary. The explosion was staged. The insurance payout goes through 4 shells back to Dom. Save it. Emma, save it. Tell me when you're in a facility with a surgeon. His eyes didn't close, but they stopped trying to focus. That was almost worse. They reached the service exit at the far end of the corridor. The operator pushed it open and the cold air hit them like a correction. Sharp, immediate, Colorado November at 1:40 in the morning. The transport vehicle was already there. Not an ambulance, a modified SUV with a medical interior, which was going to be tight and not ideal and considerably better than staying. Getting Rel through the service door and into the vehicle took 4 minutes and cost him blood pressure points she didn't have to spare. His systolic hit 82 during the transfer, and she had the IV wide open before the door closed. She climbed in with him. The operator looked at her through the open door. "You should come out," he said. "I'll come out when he's in the vehicle and stable." She didn't look up. "Go." The door closed. Found. She worked in the dark interior for 7 minutes while the vehicle moved through streets she couldn't see. She had what Nguyen had prepared and what she'd grabbed from the supply room on the way out, which wasn't much and was going to have to be enough. She kept his airway clear, kept the IV running, talked to him in the low, flat tone she'd learned from a medic in a different life. Not reassuring exactly, just present. Just saying, "I'm here, you're not alone, stay with me." His pressure came back up to 86, then 89, then held. She leaned back against the vehicle wall and let herself breathe for the first time in an hour. The drive in her pocket was a hard, small weight against her hip. She thought about what Rel had said. Transfer records, insurance subsidiaries, Voss's logs. She thought about Richard Voss in his expensive civilian clothes walking the hospital corridor like he already owned the outcome. She thought about Colonel Marsh's voice on the phone saying, "We know," and the quality of those 2 words, the specific gravity of people who have been building a case for a long time and are watching the last pieces come within reach. She pulled the drive out. looked at it in the dim light. It was a standard encrypted thumb drive in a waterproof case, unmarked, indistinguishable from 1,000 others. Rel had been carrying this through a refinery explosion. The waterproof case had done its job. She could see no damage. She put it back in her pocket. The vehicle stopped. The secondary facility was a converted industrial unit 3 miles from the hospital. She'd passed it without ever registering it, the way you pass things that were designed not to be registered. Inside, it was a different world. Portable surgical lighting, 2 treatment tables, equipment she recognized and equipment she didn't, and a physician who introduced himself as Major Elias Strand, Army surgeon, board certified, 12 years of deployment experience. She gave Strand the handoff in 90 seconds. He asked 3 questions, all good ones. She answered them and stepped back and let him work. Colonel Marsh was waiting near the entrance. She looked older in person than she had in the parking lot 2 hours ago. Not tired. Marsh didn't do tired, or at least she didn't show it, but older. The kind of older that accumulated in people who had been managing impossible things for a long time. "Walk with me," Marsh said. They walked to the far end of the unit, away from the surgical area, away from the operator standing near the vehicle. "Voss moved faster than we projected," Marsh said. "He had people inside the hospital. The security guard you identified, we have him in custody. There were 2 others." 3 men in dark gear through the ambulance bay. "We have one of them, 2 exfiltrated." Emma processed that. "They didn't get what they came for." "No, but they know they didn't get it, which means they know it's still in play." Marsh paused. "Rel told you about the drive?" "Yes." "Do you have it?" Emma reached into her pocket, held it out. Marsh took it, looked at it, didn't open it. "What's on it?" Emma said. "A complete record of a procurement fraud operation that's been running for 6 years. Falsified contracts, diverted funds, materiel that was reported destroyed but sold on secondary markets." Marsh's voice was measured, clinical. "And evidence of 3 operations that were compromised from the inside. Operations where people died because someone sold their parameters to the wrong buyers." Emma stood very still. "One of those operations," Marsh said, "was Lighthouse." The word hit her in the chest like a physical thing. Lighthouse. The operation where she'd gone in expecting a controlled extraction and found a massacre waiting. Where she'd gotten 3 people out and left 2 behind because there was no other option. Where she'd been told afterward that the intelligence failure was an anomaly, a tragic convergence of factors. Nothing systemic, nothing intentional. She'd spent 3 years living with that. "Intentional," she said. It wasn't a question. "The parameters for Lighthouse were leaked 48 hours before insertion," Marsh said, "by someone in Hargrove's office." She looked at the floor. She looked at the surgical table where Strand was working on Rel. She thought about 2 names she'd spent 3 years trying not to think about. 2 people who had trusted her, and the mission, and the system that built the mission. "Hargrove," she said. "Deputy Director Warren Hargrove. He's been in the position for 8 years. The procurement fraud funded private security operations that he controlled directly. He's been running a parallel structure inside the department, contracts routed through shells, influence over specific operational decisions, and a disposal mechanism for anything that threatened exposure." Marsh paused. The refinery was one of Hargrove's early shell vehicles. When Rel identified the connection and planted the drive, Hargrove ordered the explosion to cover the recovery. "He blew up a refinery," Emma said it flatly, "to recover a drive. And to create a scenario where Rel would be brought to a civilian hospital without full protective protocol, where Voss could reach him." She thought about the 43 patients she'd triaged tonight, the man named Gerald with fluid in his chest, the child with the wrapped hands and the blank face, the 22-year-old who'd been having a panic attack in a corridor that smelled like smoke and antiseptic. "He burned civilians for this," she said. "Yes." The anger she felt was cold. It wasn't the hot kind that made people make bad decisions. It was the settled kind, the kind that had been building since Lighthouse and had just been given an address. "What do you need from me?" she said. Marsh looked at her with something that might have been respect or recognition or both. "Testimony," she said. "Your account of Lighthouse. First person, documented, submitted to the federal investigation that is currently active and has been building toward this for 14 months. She held up the drive. This, combined with your testimony and Rel's, is enough to proceed. When? Now would be good. Before Voss regroups and before Hargrove decides that a broader response is worth the exposure. Emma almost said something, stopped, started again. Hargrove knows I'm alive. He will, yes. Voss will have reported your presence. And he'll know I was in contact with Rel. He'll know the drive is compromised. Yes. She thought about what Rel had said in the hospital. You should have stayed buried. She thought about the civilian clothes and the flat smile and the way he'd looked at Rel like a problem. He'll move against the hospital, she said. Marsh was quiet for 1 second too long. We have personnel there, she said. We have 2 operators in the building. Cross-referencing the contractor profiles we've pulled, Voss has access to approximately 6 additional personnel in the Hawthorne area. She paused. We are working to reinforce the hospital presence. 2 operators against 6 contractors in a building full of critically ill patients. The federal escalation is in motion. We have... What's the timeline on federal response? Another pause. 60 to 90 minutes, Marsh said, and Voss's people can move in. 15. Emma looked at the door. I need to go back, she said. Blake, there are patients in that building who can't move. The surgical team is in the OR. Cross has no idea what's coming. She looked at Marsh. You need my testimony. I know that, but you need me to survive the next 90 minutes first. And the people most likely to be in the direct path of whatever Hargrove authorizes next are sitting in hospital beds in Redwood Valley. Marsh studied her. I can give you 2 more operators, she said finally, and access to the hospital's security system. It's already up on our monitors. Then I need to see it. She spent 11 minutes at Marsh's operations station, a folding table with 3 monitors and a technician named Corporal Webb, who moved through security feeds with the efficiency of someone who'd been doing it all night. She mapped the building, entry points, blind spots, the corridor configurations she already knew from working in them for 18 months, the areas where patient density was highest and mobility was lowest. The 2 contractors who'd exfiltrated from the hospital had repositioned. Webb had them on exterior cameras, one on the north side, one near the ambulance bay, both stationary, watching, not moving, waiting for something. What are they waiting for, she said. Webb pulled up a wider view, said nothing, pointed. 2 more vehicles had appeared on the street east of the hospital, parked, engines probably off, positioned for rapid approach. She counted. 4 exterior, plus whatever Voss still had inside. He's staging, she said. Yes, ma'am. For what? Webb looked at her. Based on positioning, they're covering all exit points. This isn't a recovery operation anymore. She understood what that meant. She went back to Marsh. He's shifted objectives, she said. The drive is gone. He knows that. He's not trying to recover it anymore. Marsh's face told her she'd read it right. Containment, Emma said. He's going to try to silence the witnesses. It's the logical escalation. With the drive in our possession and Rel's testimony available, Rel's in this building, and every staff member who interacted with his arrival tonight is a potential witness. Marsh nodded slowly. Jolene Watts, Emma said. The nurses. The techs. We're aware. They don't know they're witnesses. They don't know any of this. Her voice stayed flat, but something underneath it wasn't flat. They're just people who showed up to work tonight. Blake, I'm going back, she said, with or without your 2 operators. Marsh looked at her for a long moment. The kind of look that was doing a full assessment, not just surface. The specific look of a person who had sent people into bad situations before and knew what it cost and was deciding whether the cost was justified. With, Marsh said finally, 2 operators. And you report to me, not the other way around. Anything you find, you relay. Anything you plan, you relay. Understood. Blake? Marsh stopped her with a hand on her arm. Hargrove knows you're in Hawthorne now. He knows you're active. He knows you have the drive. She held her gaze. You should also know, he authorized Lighthouse. The cold anger settled lower. He signed the leak, Marsh said, personally, to protect a contract worth $400 million. She held that for 3 seconds. Then she said, "I know," even though she hadn't known until this moment, because some part of her had known all along, had known the way you know things you're not ready to look at directly. She picked up her jacket from the chair. She walked toward the door. Behind her, from the surgical table, she heard Strand say something low and clipped to his assistant. And then she heard the monitor alarm, and she heard it stop just as quickly, and she kept walking because Rel was in the best hands available, and the people who weren't in the best hands available were 11 minutes away in a building that 4 armed contractors were positioning to enter. She got into the vehicle. Webb's voice came over the operator's radio as they pulled out. "Movement on the east side," he said. "All 4 exterior units. They're going in." The operator beside her checked his watch. 68 minutes until federal response. The hospital was 8 minutes away. Emma looked out the window at the dark Colorado streets and thought about Jolene Watts, who had covered for her all night without asking why, and Cross, who was a difficult man but hadn't deserved this, and Gerald in Bay 4, who had told her his name while his lungs were failing, and 42 other people who had come to a hospital tonight because it was supposed to be the safest place they could be. Then her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered it. "Miss Blake?" The voice was measured, unhurried, the voice of a man who had spent a long time being the most dangerous person in any room he occupied. "My name is Warren Hargrove. I think it's time we spoke directly." Her jaw tightened. She said nothing. "You've been very impressive tonight," he said, "but I want you to understand something clearly. The drive you recovered is inadmissible. Our legal team has already built the framework to challenge its chain of custody. Sergeant Rel's testimony will be contested on the basis of his condition and medication levels at the time of any statement. And you," he paused, just long enough. "You are a person who has been officially deceased for 3 years. Courts find that complicated." "What do you want?" she said. "I want you to consider your options," he said, "because right now my people are entering Redwood Valley Medical Center, and whether they leave quietly or not depends entirely on what you do in the next 10 minutes. The line stayed open. She looked at the operator beside her. He'd heard it. "How far?" she said. 6 minutes, he said. 6 minutes. And Hargrove's people were already inside. She kept the line open. Hargrove didn't fill the silence. That was intentional. A man who'd spent years managing difficult people knew that silence was pressure, and pressure produced mistakes. She let him wait and watched the dark streets pass outside the vehicle window and thought about what she had and what she didn't. What she had: 2 operators in the vehicle, 2 already inside the hospital, Marsh's operations team tracking the situation from 3 miles away, and a federal investigation that had been building for 14 months and needed 63 more minutes to deliver protective response. What she didn't have: 63 minutes. "You're still there," Hargrove said. "I'm here." "Then let's be practical. The people currently entering that hospital have instructions not to harm patients. They're looking for 2 things: any documentation that connects tonight's events to our office and the staff members who interacted with the federal asset." "Interacted with," she said. "Yes." "You mean witnesses?" A pause. "I mean people who may have been exposed to sensitive materials and may require interview." She looked at the operator beside her. He was watching the road. His jaw was set. "If I surrender the drive," she said, "and come in, then my people leave the hospital. Tonight becomes a mass casualty response to an industrial accident. Tragic, but contained." He let that settle. "Sergeant Rel's prognosis is uncertain regardless. These things happen in field conditions." Her hand tightened on the phone. "You have 4 minutes to consider," he said. "After that, my people's instructions become less specific." She hung up. "Tell me you recorded that," she said to the operator. He held up a tablet. A recording app was running, the waveform still moving from the tail end of the call. "Marsh is already listening," he said. "Live feed." Marsh's voice came over his radio 2 seconds later. "Blake, do not engage Hargrove's people directly. Repeat, do not engage. We are accelerating federal response. Director Calloway has authorized emergency deployment. Timeline: working on it," which meant not soon enough. I need access to the hospital PA system, she said, and the security monitors. We have the security feeds. How many of Hargrove's people are inside? Webb's voice replaced Marsh's. 4 confirmed inside, 2 still exterior, covering north exit and the ambulance bay. Where are the interior 4? 2 in the main corridor near the east wing, 1 near the stairwell on the second floor, 1 unaccounted. He dropped off camera near the supply corridor 3 minutes ago. The supply corridor ran parallel to the back of the building. It connected to the medication room, the equipment storage, and the hospital's IT closet where the network infrastructure was housed. He's going for the cameras, she said. Understood, Webb said. I'm capturing the current feeds. If he cuts the system, we keep what we have. Good, she thought fast. Hargrove said documentation. He's not just looking for the drive. He wants anything that documents Rel's admission. Chart records, intake logs, any record that places a federal operative in that hospital tonight. The hospital is still on partial backup power, the operator driving said. Their system would be paper, she said. After a power interruption, the ED goes to paper backup for charting. That's protocol. She pressed her hand against her pocket, felt nothing. The drive was with Marsh. The intake log for Rel. It was handwritten during the power outage. Jolene had it. Marsh came back. We need that log. I know. She looked at her watch. 2 minutes out. They came in through the service entrance, the same route she'd used to move Rel 40 minutes ago. The door was still accessible, still unlocked, and the red emergency lighting made the corridor look like something from the wrong end of a fever dream. Emma moved first, the 2 operators behind her in the specific quiet of people who knew how to move in buildings. She went left, not toward the main corridor. That was where 2 of Hargrove's people were stationed, and confronting them with 3 people in a hallway full of patients was the wrong math. She went to the nurses' station in the secondary wing, the smaller desk that Jolene used when she needed to get away from the main station. The intake log was in the top drawer, Jolene's handwriting. She'd seen it on 100 charts, compact and certain. She pulled it out and scanned it. Rel's entry was there, John Doe, military transport, blast injuries, admitted 11:58 p.m. No name, which was protocol for military transfers. But the care record below had Emma's initials on 3 interventions, her own name in her own hand. She folded the log and put it inside her scrub top. One of the operators touched her shoulder, pointed. At the far end of the secondary corridor, a figure in dark clothing was standing at the door to the medication room working on the lock. Not hurrying, patient, professional. She held up a hand, wait, and looked at the secondary nurse's station phone. She picked it up, dialed the main nurse's station extension. 3 rings, 4. Then, who? Hello? Cross. She almost closed her eyes. Dr. Cross, she said, keeping her voice at the volume of a normal phone call, not loud enough to carry to the figure at the end of the corridor. It's Blake. I need you to listen to me very carefully and not respond loudly. A pause. Blake? Where the hell are you? The police are here. There are men in the building who aren't. There's been an incident with the security. I know. Listen. The men in dark clothing are not law enforcement. Do not engage with them. Do not let them access patient records or the charting system. They're already at the main station. They're saying they have federal authority to... They don't, Dr. Cross. She said his name the way she said things she needed to land. You need to get your staff away from the main station. Take them to the break room on the second floor. Lock the door. I'm the trauma chief. I'm not going to hide in a break room while... Nathan. She never used his first name. It stopped him. People are going to get hurt if you're standing at that station when these men decide they're done asking. Please, take your staff and go. A silence, longer than she would have preferred. What about the patients? He said. His voice had changed. The authority had gone out of it. Not weakness exactly, but something honest underneath it. Real concern, unperformed. The patients need the staff alive, she said. Go. She hung up. The figure at the medication room door had gotten it open and gone inside. One of the operators looked at her. She shook her head. Not yet. Taking him down in that corridor would make noise and burn their position. She needed Hargrove's people contained, not spooked. She picked up the phone again, dialed Marsh. Main corridor has 2, she said. Secondary wing has 1 in the medication room. 1 still unaccounted. Webb found the 4th, Marsh said. He's in the IT closet. He's not cutting the cameras. He's copying the admissions database. Stop him. We're working on Marsh. He gets that database. Every staff member who logged an interaction with Rel's admission is identifiable. Every nurse, every tech. He gets names and shift schedules and home addresses from the HR integration. A beat. Webb, Marsh said, off radio. Already on it, Webb's voice said faintly. What's your federal timeline? Emma said. 38 minutes. 38 minutes. 4 armed contractors in the building, 2 more outside, and 38 minutes of gap. She thought about Gerald in Bay 4. She thought about the child with the wrapped hands. She thought about the burn patient she'd flagged earlier, the one nobody was watching closely enough. I'm going to the main corridor, she said. Blake, I told you not to. I'm not engaging them. I need to see the patient situation in the main corridor firsthand. Your camera feeds have blind spots. She paused. I know this building. They don't. She gave Marsh 3 seconds to object, and when she didn't, she took it as permission, which was a generous interpretation, and she knew it. She left the operators at the secondary wing entrance and went to the main corridor alone. The 2 figures in dark clothing were at the nurses' station, and they'd made a mistake that told her something about who they were. They'd positioned themselves behind the desk, which felt like control, but actually limited their sight lines. They could see the corridor in front of them and the station itself. They couldn't see the alcove by the supply room or the doorways behind them without turning. Private contractors. Good ones, probably, at whatever they were actually hired for. But this wasn't a field operation. This was a hospital, and hospitals were specific environments where specific knowledge mattered, and they didn't have it. She walked into the corridor through the alcove entrance. 41 patients. Some were asleep or sedated. Some were awake and frightened. She could read the quality of frightened in the ones who'd registered the armed strangers at the nurses' station. The ones lying still with their eyes open and their hands close to their blankets. 2 were trying to be invisible, which was the right instinct, even if they didn't know why they had it. She looked at the station. One of the figures was on a laptop, pulling data probably, running the same database copy the 4th man was doing from the IT closet. The other was watching the corridor. He saw her. She was in scrubs. She had a stethoscope around her neck that she'd grabbed by reflex on the way through the secondary wing. She kept her body language exactly nurse-shaped, purposeful, directional, slightly tired, the specific affect of someone who had been on their feet for 7 hours during a mass casualty and had 4 more to go. She walked to the patient nearest the station, male, mid-60s, burns to both forearms, resting. She checked his IV without looking at the figures at the station. She adjusted the rate. It didn't need adjusting, but the motion was right. She looked at his chart. Hey, the watching figure. His voice was pitched low, controlling. Nurse. She looked up. Appropriate response time. Not too fast, not too slow. Sir, this is an active patient area, she said. I need to ask you to keep your voice down. What's your name? She looked at her badge. He could see it from there. E. Blake, RN. Blake. He looked at the laptop figure. Something passed between them. We're going to need you to come with us, the watching figure said. I'm in the middle of patient care. Now. She looked at the patients within her line of sight, looked at the corridor, looked at the watching figure with an expression she'd calibrated carefully. Not defiance, not fear, the specific professional displeasure of someone who resented the interruption. Can I at least finish? Now, he said again. She set the chart down. Let her shoulders drop slightly, the body language of compliance. Started walking toward the station. Over his shoulder, through the station window that looked into the corridor beyond, she saw Cross. He was standing at the corridor junction, not hidden, not retreated, standing there in his white coat with his arms at his sides. His face had the specific expression of a man who had made a decision he wasn't sure about and was committed to it anyway. He had a phone in his hand. He was filming. Both figures at the station turned to see what she was looking at. She moved. Not toward the exit. She went sideways, behind the station desk, to the PA system control panel that was built into the wall behind the main monitor. She found the all-call button and hit it before either figure had completed their turn. "Attention all staff," she said, into the microphone, her voice carrying through every speaker in the building. "This is Nurse Blake. There are unauthorized individuals in the main corridor and the medication room. All staff, please follow emergency security protocol. All ambulatory patients, stay in your rooms and do not open your doors. Security protocol is now active." She stepped back from the panel. The watching figure grabbed her arm. "Bad idea," he said. "Probably," she said. And then the two operators from the secondary wing were in the corridor, and they were moving with a precision that had nothing civilian in it, and the watching figure's attention split. The worst thing that can happen to a person in a confrontation. And Emma drove her elbow into the inside of his wrist, the way she'd been taught before she'd ever set foot in a hospital, and his grip broke. She didn't wait to see what happened next. She ran. The medication room figure came out of the supply corridor at a run, drawn by the PA announcement, and she nearly collided with him at the junction. She turned hard left. He followed. She went through the door into the East Wing stairwell, which she knew and he didn't, and she went up instead of continuing through the building, which was the non-obvious move, and she heard him hesitate at the bottom of the stairs. 3 seconds, maybe 4, before he followed. Second floor. She pushed through the door and into the corridor. The second floor was inpatient overflow, not usually occupied during off-peak, but tonight it had been open for mass casualty volume. 12 patients up here, she knew from the intake log. Fewer staff. More room. She moved down the corridor and pulled out her phone. "I'm on the second floor," she said to Marsh. "One following me up the stairs." "What's the status on the main corridor?" "Your operators have contained 2. The IT closet contact is Webb. Where is he?" "He's in the south stairwell, moving toward the roof." "Roof." She filed that. "The 4th," she said. "The main corridor too. Are they secured?" "Zip-tied to the station," Marsh said, and there was a quality in her voice that Emma recognized as someone who had just watched something unexpected. "Your trauma physician is standing over them with a fire extinguisher." Emma stopped walking for half a second. "Cross," she said. He came out of the corridor junction and put the extinguisher against the back of one of their heads and told them not to move, Marsh said. Then he took the laptop. She almost laughed. Didn't. "Tell him to stay put," she said. "Tell him not to touch the laptop. We need the chain of custody clean." Already relayed. Behind her, the stairwell door opened. She went through the nearest patient room door, pulling it mostly closed, watching through the gap. The medication room figure moved down the corridor with a flashlight, checking rooms. He was good, methodical, not rushing. But the second floor had a layout feature that the first floor didn't. The rooms on the east side had a connecting door to the storage corridor that ran parallel to the main hallway. Old construction, the kind of thing that appeared on architectural plans, but not in the mental maps of people who hadn't worked the building. She went through the connecting door, came out behind him. She had a pulse oximeter from the room in her hand, which was not a weapon, but it was a solid piece of equipment. She didn't use it as one. She didn't have to. Because when she came through the door behind him, he turned, and in the moment of reorientation, she said clearly and directly, "There are 2 armed federal operators between you and the exit. Your colleagues downstairs are in restraints. You have one choice that doesn't end with you in federal custody for conspiracy to commit murder." He looked at her. "Put it down," she said. A long moment. She watched his hands, watched his face, watched the calculation happening behind his eyes, the mission parameters, the risk assessment, the specific mental arithmetic of a man who had signed up for something that had just become a significantly different thing than what he'd agreed to. He set the firearm on the floor. She stepped back and kept him in her sightline and called Marsh. "Second floor," she said. "1 surrendered. I need someone up here." "Copy. 40 seconds. She looked at the man on the floor who was now sitting with his back against the wall with his hands visible, doing the smart thing. "Smart," she said. He didn't answer. She looked at her watch, 22 minutes until federal response. Then her phone buzzed. Webb. "Blake?" His voice was clipped. "The 4th contact. He's not going to the roof for an exit." "Then what?" He's carrying equipment, Webb said. We just got a cleaner image from the stairwell camera. He has a transmitter, military-grade signal booster. A pause. He's going to the roof for comms. She understood immediately. The hospital was in a cellular dead zone on its north and west sides. It was a known issue, the reason the staff used landlines for interdepartment communication during events. A signal booster from the roof would let someone make a call that the building's walls and terrain were currently blocking. Hargrove. He's going to report in, she said. Yes, and based on what we know about Hargrove's escalation protocol, he'll authorize a harder response, she said. If the containment operation is compromised, he goes to destruction of evidence. Broader. She was already moving toward the stairwell. How long until he reaches the roof? He's there, Webb said. She hit the stairwell door and went up. The roof access door was propped open with a brick. Someone had done it at shift change, probably, the way people propped doors they used regularly. She came through it and into the cold November air, and the man with the transmitter was 20 feet away, on his knee, equipment deployed, speaking rapidly into a handset. She heard Hargrove's name. She heard her name. She walked toward him. He saw her at 15 feet and came up fast, the handset still in his hand, and she kept walking with her hands visible and her voice level. Federal response is 18 minutes out. Your colleagues are in custody. Whatever he's telling you to do, think about what that makes you. The handset crackled. Hargrove's voice, distant and compressed by the transmission. Full withdrawal, clean the site, all personnel. It's over, she said. Not angry, just true. The man looked at her, looked at the handset. He burned a refinery, she said. 43 people came through that ED tonight. You were part of that. His jaw worked. She stepped forward and took the handset from his hand. He let her. She put it to her ear. Hargrove, she said. Silence on the line. Then, Miss Blake. It's done, she said. Whatever you're planning to authorize, it's done. I have your contractor, I have the drive, I have Rel's testimony, and I have mine, and I have 14 months of federal investigation that lands on your desk in 17 minutes. She paused. Surrender now or surrender then. Either way, you surrender. The line was quiet long enough that she thought he'd cut it. Then, you should have stayed dead, he said. I know, she said. Lucky for everyone I didn't. She ended the call. The federal response arrived in 16 minutes, not 17. 12 vehicles, a combination of FBI and DOJ, with 2 military liaison officers from Marsh's command in the lead vehicle. They came in through the main entrance and the ambulance bay simultaneously, and by the time they reached the main corridor, Cross was still standing over the 2 zip-tied contractors with the fire extinguisher, which the lead FBI agent apparently found both baffling and deeply satisfying. Emma came down from the roof with the 4th contractor walking ahead of her, and she handed him to the first federal agent she found, and then leaned against the corridor wall and let herself stop moving for the first time in 3 hours. Her hand hurt. She'd forgotten about the cut from the supply closet. It felt like a year ago. The gauze she'd wrapped it in had bled through at some point and dried. Jolene found her 30 seconds later. You're bleeding, Jolene said. It's old. Old bleeding is still bleeding. Jolene produced a fresh dressing from her pocket with the reflexive competence of 11 years. Cross filmed them. Did you know that? Marsh told me. He stood there with that extinguisher for 11 minutes. Jolene wrapped the dressing with practiced efficiency. 11 minutes, Emma. He looked terrified the entire time. His hands were shaking. She tied the knot. He didn't move. Emma looked down the corridor. Cross was talking to a federal agent, his white coat disheveled, the extinguisher finally set down at his feet. He looked exhausted and shaken, and about 10 years older than he had at the start of the shift. He glanced up and met her eyes across the corridor. She didn't smile. He didn't either, but something passed in the look. Acknowledgement, maybe. The specific acknowledgement of 2 people who had been through the same impossible night from very different positions and had both, in their own ways, not broken. He looked away first. She let him. But the IT closet recovery took 40 minutes. Webb had captured the partial database copy before it completed, and the FBI technical team confirmed that no full extraction had been transmitted. The attempt had been interrupted before it finished. The names and addresses of the staff were intact. Secure. The admissions intake log, Jolene's handwriting, Emma's initials, was logged into evidence at 3:47 a.m. Richard Voss was picked up at a gas station 12 miles from Hawthorne at 4:02 a.m. He had a go bag in the back seat and a burner phone with 3 calls to a number registered to a shell company in Delaware. He said nothing. His attorney, contacted within 90 minutes, said considerably more, most of it unhelpful. At 4:18 a.m., Marsh relayed to Emma that Sergeant First Class Dominic Rell had been upgraded from critical to serious condition. Major Strand had addressed the internal bleeding, stabilized the pelvis, and described the procedure as technically successful while looking like a man who had earned every one of his gray hairs. Emma sat in the secondary nurses' station with a cup of coffee that had gone cold and read the message twice. At 4:31 a.m., her phone rang. Unknown number, different unknown number than before. She answered it because she was tired and the unknown numbers had been coming in all night, and she no longer had the energy to be cautious about them. Blake. The voice was male, older, with the specific timbre of someone who was accustomed to being listened to. My name is Director Calloway, Federal Bureau of Investigation. She sat up slightly. I've been briefed on tonight's events, he said. I want to tell you directly. The investigation into Warren Hargrove has been active since last year. Tonight accelerated our timeline significantly. We will be moving to arrest within the hour. She said nothing. Let him continue. There are aspects of the investigation that will require your formal participation, he said. Your testimony, your account of Operation Lighthouse, and the material you recovered. A pause. I know this is not what you came to Hawthorne for. I know the past 3 years have been irregular. I want you to know that the Bureau is prepared to work with the DOD and the relevant oversight committees to formally address your status. My status, she said. Your official status is currently deceased, he said. That needs to be corrected. She almost said something, looked out the window of the nurses' station into the corridor, federal agents, hospital staff, the slow restoration of order in a space that had been unrecognizable 2 hours ago. Director, she said, before any of that. Hargrove. We're moving to... He authorized Lighthouse, she said. Personally, I need that to be part of the record. Not a footnote, not a related matter. The primary record. A pause. It will be, Calloway said. She held the phone and looked at the corridor and thought about 2 names she hadn't let herself think about in 3 years. She thought about them now. Let herself. Okay, she said. She was about to hang up when the fire alarm went off. Not a test alarm, not a false alert from the chaos of the night. The full evacuation signal. The specific pattern that meant a real event, confirmed, in a specific zone. She looked at the zone indicator on the panel behind the station. Zone 7. The roof. She was already running when her radio crackled and Webb's voice came through clipped and urgent. Blake, we have a problem. The transmitter on the roof. It had a secondary function. We just found the signal. It wasn't just a comms relay. She hit the stairwell door. What was it? She said into the radio. A trigger, Webb said. Someone activated a device. We're reading an incendiary signature from the building's north utility shaft. She took the stairs 2 at a time. How long? She said. Based on the signal timing? Webb's voice had gone very even, the way voices did when the information was bad and the speaker was controlling their reaction. Maybe 8 minutes, maybe less. She came through the roof access door. The transmitter was still on the ground where she'd left it, but beside it, partially concealed by the HVAC housing she hadn't thought to check, was a secondary device. Small, wired, professional. The kind of thing you placed and forgot about and triggered remotely when the primary operation had failed and the only remaining objective was destruction of evidence. Not just the drive, not just the records, the building. Hargrove had authorized it the moment the containment operation collapsed. He'd triggered it remotely, probably from wherever he was running to, with a dead man's switch that didn't require him to be present or safe or even free. She was looking at it when her phone rang again. She answered. Hargrove's voice. Compressed and distant now, like he was already somewhere else, already moving. 14 months of federal case building burns with it, Miss Blake. The evidence chain, the witnesses, the records, everything in that building. A tragic electrical fire following a chaotic night. He paused. And you're on the roof. She looked at the device. She looked at the door behind her. 8 minutes. Maybe less. She looked at the device for exactly 2 seconds. Not out of hesitation, she was reading it. The casing, the wire configuration, the way the secondary lead ran toward the HVAC, housing, and disappeared into the utility access panel. Professional construction. Timer independent, which meant cutting one wire wasn't going to solve anything because the trigger had already been sent and the circuit was closed, and the only variable now was the burn rate of whatever accelerant had been placed in the north utility shaft below. She put the phone to her ear. You miscalculated, she said to Hargrove. Did I? You assumed the drive was the only copy. Silence. Marsh's team imaged it 40 minutes ago, she said. Every file, every transfer record, every log with your name on it. The copy is already with Director Calloway's office. She wasn't running yet because running while she was still talking was information she didn't want to give him. So burning this building gets you a structure fire and an arson charge and 43 injured civilians adding to your list. It doesn't get you the evidence. A longer silence. You're lying, he said. Warren. She used his first name deliberately. You spent 6 years building a parallel operation inside a federal department. You know what good intelligence looks like. You know I'm not lying. The line went dead. She ran. Yes. Down the stairs at a pace she hadn't used in a while, her hand slamming the railing at each landing, her mind running a parallel track, building layout, utility shaft location, the specific architecture of a 1987 hospital construction that she'd learned incidentally over 18 months of working in it. The north utility shaft ran from the basement mechanical room to the roof. It serviced the boilers, the electrical conduit, and the HVAC return system for the entire north wing. The north wing was where the OR was, where the surgical team had been operating for 90 minutes, where 2 patients were in active post-op recovery. She hit the main floor and nearly ran into a federal agent coming the other way. The north utility shaft, she said without stopping. Incendiary device. Basement mechanical room, probably the boiler access. Get your people moving and get patients out of the north wing. He was already on his radio. She kept moving. What? The basement mechanical room smelled like hot metal and age. The particular smell of industrial systems that had been running for decades without replacement. She found the boiler access panel on the north wall, and she found what Hargrove's people had placed there. A compact incendiary unit, magnetic mount, positioned against the panel housing where the heat transfer would be fastest. The timer read 4 minutes, 12 seconds, then 4 minutes, 11. She crouched in front of it. She had no tools. She had nursing shears in her pocket. The trauma scissors she carried on every shift, habit, reflex. She had a phone. She had hands that were functional, but one of which had a laceration wrapped in dressing that was going to make fine motor work interesting. She called Webb. Basement, she said. I'm looking at the device. Blake, I need you to tell me if this is the only one or if there are more. She heard him typing. Heard Marsh's voice somewhere behind him, terse and rapid. Heard another voice she didn't recognize. Based on the signal signature, Webb said, there's one transmitter output, one device. A pause. We think? Great, she said. Very reassuring. 4 minutes flat. She looked at the device. Magnetic mount meant she could pull it off the panel without triggering the internal circuit. That part wasn't booby-trapped because the construction was designed for placement efficiency, not counterhandling. The risk was the timer circuit, which was a separate closed loop, and if she interrupted that incorrectly, she'd accelerate rather than stop the sequence. She'd done this once, in a different country, in a different life, with a proper kit and a partner who talked her through the steps, and a margin of error measured in minutes rather than seconds. She'd gotten it right then because the conditions were controlled enough. These conditions were not controlled. She pulled the device off the panel. It came free without incident. She set it on the concrete floor. 3 minutes, 42. She looked at the wires. Her shears were inadequate, but they were what she had. She identified the timer circuit by the routing. In this type of construction, the power lead was always the thicker gauge, the timer circuit the thinner, the initiator, the one with the secondary insulation. She could see all three. She cut the timer circuit. The display went dark. She sat back on her heels and let the breath out of her body in one long, controlled release. Then she looked at the device in front of her and thought about the fact that she'd just made a judgment call in a basement with nursing shears, which was either the most competent thing she'd done all night or the most reckless, and the outcome was the same either way, so it probably didn't matter which category it fell into. She picked up her phone. "It's done," she said to Webb. A pause. Then Marsh, taking the phone from Webb. "Are you intact?" "Yes." "Is the device inert?" "Yes." "Blake." Marsh's voice had something in it that Emma hadn't heard from her before. Not quite relief, because Marsh didn't do relief, but the tonal equivalent of someone setting down a very heavy thing. "Come upstairs." The North Wing evacuation had been partial. 2 patients had been moved from post-op to the South Corridor, and the surgical team had suspended the procedure they were in the middle of and covered and secured the patient for transport. Nobody had been hurt. The fire alarm had cleared once Webb confirmed the device was disabled, and the building, which had spent the last 4 hours being everything except a hospital, began the slow process of becoming one again. Emma came up from the basement at 5:14 a.m. The main corridor was full of federal agents, 2 of Marsh's operators, 4 of Hargrove's contractors and zip ties along the east wall, and somewhere in the middle of it all, Dr. Nathan Cross sitting on a waiting room chair with his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands. The fire extinguisher was on the floor beside him. He hadn't moved it. She stopped in front of him. He looked up. His eyes were red at the edges, not crying, or not recently, but the kind of red that came from adrenaline and sustained high-level fear and the specific exhaustion of holding a position you weren't sure you could hold. "You filmed them," she said. "Someone had to document it." He sounded defensive, which was probably reflex. Then something shifted. "I heard your announcement. I knew if I just ran..." He stopped. There were people at that station who had no idea what was happening. "I know." He looked at the zip-tied contractors, looked at the floor. What were they actually after? "Evidence," she said. "And the people who had it." He was quiet for a moment. She could see him reassembling what he understood about tonight, fitting the pieces together with the new information. She could see the specific moment when the shape of it landed, when he understood that the quiet nurse he'd dismissed for 18 months had been, at every point of this night, operating several levels above anything he'd seen. "The patient in Bay 2, he said, federal operative. "And the military people. Here for him. And for me. For you." He said it slowly, like the weight of it was settling. "Why for you?" She looked at him. She thought about what she owed him, which was more than she'd been giving him, and less than a full account of the last 6 years. She thought about what was accurate and usable. "I used to do something else," she said, "before I was a nurse." He looked at her for a long time. The evaluation in his face was different than usual. Not the assessment of a superior gauging a subordinate, but something more level, more honest. "The hemothorax," he said. "Bay 4. Gerald." "Yes." "You flagged him 3 times." "Yes." He was quiet again. Then, "I should have listened the first time." She didn't agree out loud. She didn't need to. "He's stable," Cross said. "Gerald, I checked before everything happened. He's stable." "Good," she said. She left him sitting there, which felt right. Not cruel, right. He had things to think about, and she had things to do, and the morning was coming whether either of them was ready for it. Warren Hargrove was arrested at 5:47 a.m. at a private airfield 30 miles east of Hawthorne. He had a chartered flight booked under a subsidiary account that Webb had flagged an hour before. He had a carry-on bag with 2 hard drives, a passport, and $400,000 in mixed currency. He was transported in a federal vehicle with 2 FBI agents and said nothing for the entire ride except to ask, once, whether his attorney had been contacted. The attorney had been contacted. It wouldn't help him much. Emma heard about the arrest from Marsh at 5:52 a.m., standing at the secondary nurses' station with a second cup of coffee that was also going cold. She received the information the way she'd been receiving information all night, quietly and without letting the surface show what was happening underneath. She felt something. She wasn't sure yet what to call it. Not satisfaction exactly, not relief. Something more like the specific sensation of a weight you'd been carrying so long you'd stopped registering it suddenly being absent. The phantom awareness of something that was gone. Richard Voss had already been processed and was in federal holding. The 4 contractors from the hospital were in county custody pending federal charging decisions. 2 more of Hargrove's network had been identified through the transmitter's signal logs and were being picked up from separate locations. The drive's contents had been formally entered into the federal record at 4:08 a.m. By 6 in the morning, the investigation that had been building for 14 months had enough to proceed on 17 separate counts. Emma sat with her cold coffee and a wrapped hand and let the morning arrive. Jolene found her at 6:15. She sat down without asking, which was what Jolene did, and she brought a granola bar from somewhere and set it on the desk in front of Emma without comment, which was also what Jolene did. They sat for a minute in the quiet of a corridor that was finally, tentatively, returning to something like its normal state. "Are you going to tell me?" Jolene said finally. "Some of it." "Some is fine." Emma looked at the granola bar. She picked it up. "I was a combat medic. Special operations attached. I left, or I was supposed to leave, about 3 years ago. An operation went wrong. People were hurt. I ended up outside the system for a while." "Hiding," Jolene said. "Working," Emma said. "But yes, also hiding." Here. Jolene looked at the corridor, at the federal agents still moving through it, and the patients in their beds, and the particular quality of early morning light that hospitals got when they'd been through something and were still standing. "Were you good at it?" Jolene said. "The before." Emma thought about this honestly. "Yes." "Are you good at this?" Emma looked at her. "Nursing," Jolene said. "Are you good at it?" "I think so." "You are," Jolene said simply. "You're a better nurse than Cross will ever be a doctor. That's not a criticism of him. He's competent. You're something else." She paused. "I've been doing this for 11 years, and I've seen maybe 4 people who could read a room the way you do. The way you moved through the corridor tonight, checking everyone, catching things before they went wrong. That's not just training, that's who you are." Emma didn't respond immediately. She looked at the granola bar. "I don't know what happens next," she said. It came out more honestly than she intended. "My name is I don't officially exist. There's going to be a process. Testimony, investigations, whatever they need. After that, she stopped. "I don't know." "You could stay," Jolene said. Emma looked at her. "Redwood Valley," Jolene said. "You could stay. They're going to need nurses who don't fall apart in a crisis. Apparently that's a higher bar than we thought." Emma almost smiled, came close. "I'll think about it," she said. At 7 a.m., Marsh came to find her. She'd moved to a corner of the ambulance bay, outside in the cold, which felt necessary after 7 hours of fluorescent light and recycled hospital air. The morning was clear and very cold, the sky going from dark to the particular blue that happened just before sunrise in high country. Hawthorne's skyline was nothing impressive. A water tower, some rooftops, the industrial park to the north where she could see, if she looked, a faint smear of smoke still dissipating from the direction of vantage processing. Marsh stood beside her and looked at the same horizon. "Hargrove is in federal custody," she said. "I assume you've been told." Webb texted me. "Director Calloway wants to begin your formal debrief today. We can push it to tomorrow if you need. Today is fine," Emma said. "I'd rather do it today." Marsh nodded. "Lighthouse," Emma said. "Yes." "The 2 who didn't make it." She kept her eyes on the horizon. "Marcus Teal and Priya Adara. I want their families to know the truth, not a classified summary. The truth. That's going to require, I know what it's going to require. I'm asking you to make it happen." Marsh was quiet for a moment. I'll advocate for it. I need more than advocacy. I know. A pause. I'll make it happen. Emma nodded once. They stood in the cold for another moment. The sun was beginning to happen at the edge of the mountains. Not dramatic, just the slow categorical shift from dark to not dark that was morning doing what morning did. Your status, Marsh said. The formal process to reestablish your identity is going to take approximately 6 to 8 weeks. In the interim, the DoD has authorized a provisional credential that will allow you to… Marsh. Yes. 6 to 8 weeks. Emma looked at her. Can I work? Marsh looked back. That's a specific question. I'm asking it specifically. Your nursing license was issued under Emma Blake. Emma Blake technically doesn't… Can I work? Emma said again. Here, in this hospital, while the process happens. Marsh studied her. The assessment in her face was thorough and not unsympathetic. I'll make a call, Marsh said. At 8:15 a.m., Dr. Patricia Lund held an emergency administrative meeting in her office with 4 people. Herself, the FBI's lead agent on the hospital incident, the hospital's legal counsel, and Dr. Nathan Cross. Emma wasn't in the meeting. She heard about it from Jolene at 9, which was how she heard about most things in this hospital. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. Cross came out of it without his trauma chief designation. Lund issued a formal statement to the department at 9:30, pending a full administrative review of Dr. Cross's decisions during the mass casualty response, including the delayed response to the hemothorax in Bay 4, the double assignment error, and 3 other documented triage failures. His temporary suspension from leadership was effective immediately. The review would be conducted by an independent medical board, timeline to be determined. He kept his physician credentials. He was still a doctor. He would continue seeing patients under supervision while the review proceeded. Emma heard this while she was sitting in the staff break room eating the granola bar Jolene had given her 2 hours ago. She thought about what Jolene had said. He's competent, and he was. He'd also held a fire extinguisher over 2 armed contractors for 11 minutes while his hands were shaking. Those 2 things existed simultaneously in the same person, which was generally how people worked when you looked closely enough. She wasn't glad about his suspension the way she might have been a year ago. She wasn't nothing about it either. She was something in the middle, a recognition that systems eventually caught up to their own failures, imperfectly and slowly, and with too many people getting hurt in the gap, but eventually. Eventually wasn't nothing. Boy, she gave her formal statement to the FBI at 10 a.m. in a conference room on the 2nd floor that still smelled faintly of the emergency lighting. Hot plastic, backup power, the residue of a bad night. The lead agent was a woman named Delaney, mid-40s, who conducted interviews the way good interviewers did, asked clean questions, didn't editorialize, didn't push for the dramatic version of events, just the sequence, the specifics, the facts, as Emma had experienced them. Emma gave her lighthouse. She hadn't said it out loud to anyone except Marsh in 3 years. She'd carried it in the specific way you carried things you couldn't put down and couldn't look at directly. Sideways, peripheral, always present. Saying it out loud to a federal agent in a conference room was different than she'd expected. Not easier, but more real, which was what she'd actually needed, even if she hadn't known it. She said Marcus Teal's name. She said Priya Adara's name. She said what she'd known and what she hadn't and what she'd been told afterward, and she said it all without hedging it or managing how it landed. Delaney listened. When Emma finished, Delaney said, "Thank you." Not performatively, just directly. Emma nodded. "For what it's worth," Delaney said, closing her notebook. And it was clearly not a formal part of the statement, just a person talking to another person. "We've been working on this for a long time. The Lighthouse case is part of a pattern that goes back 8 years. You're not the only one who's been carrying it." Emma looked at the table. "I know," she said. "I just didn't know that until last night." Dominic Rell was moved to a secure military medical facility at 11 a.m. Before transport, Emma was allowed 5 minutes with him, Marcia's doing, another call she'd made happen. He was more present than he'd been in the vehicle. Still damaged, still pale, still running on whatever reserve the body found when it had decided not to quit. But his eyes were tracking and his voice was audible, and the specific expression he'd had when he'd looked at her in the hospital, the complicated mix of relief and 3 years of unresolved things, was still there, quieter now. "You could have run," he said. "When Marsh found you, you could have stayed gone." "I know." "Why didn't you?" She thought about how to answer this honestly. "Because gone doesn't actually exist," she said. "I tried it for 3 years. You're still who you are. The things you know are still the things you know." He was quiet. "Teal and Adara," he said. "I know," she said. "I've been trying to get to this for 2 years, since I found the first procurement record. I kept thinking if I could just get enough, if the case was solid enough. It is now." "Yeah." He closed his eyes briefly, opened them. "You still have good hands." "Mostly," she said, and held up the wrapped one. He almost smiled. "You should have let them call a real doctor." "I am a real doctor." She paused. "Nurse. I'm a real nurse." "Yeah," he said. "You are." She stood. She needed to go. Delaney had a follow-up question, and Marsh needed her for the DOD coordination, and Rel needed to sleep more than he needed to talk. "Rel," she said at the door. He looked at her. "Next time you're running a covert operation in a refinery and it explodes," she said, "maybe don't do that." "Noted," he said. She left. The formal public statement from the FBI came at 2 p.m. Deputy Director Warren Hargrove of the Department of Defense, Office of Acquisitions and Procurement, had been arrested and charged on 14 counts, including conspiracy to commit fraud against the government, obstruction of justice, destruction of federal evidence, conspiracy to commit arson, and 4 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, 2 of those counts relating to the deaths of Special Operations personnel during Operation Lighthouse. Richard Voss faced 7 additional counts as a co-conspirator. The statement named the Vantage processing explosion as a deliberate act of sabotage, confirmed that a 6-year procurement fraud scheme had been uncovered, and indicated that additional arrests were expected as the investigation expanded. It did not name Emma Blake. At her request, she read the statement on her phone standing in the hospital parking lot, in the cold, in the same scrubs she'd been wearing since 10 o'clock the previous night. She read it twice. She didn't feel the thing she'd expected to feel, which was the sharp satisfaction of a verdict. She felt instead the slow, complicated acknowledgement of something true finally being visible after a long time in the dark. It wasn't clean. It wasn't complete. 14 counts didn't bring back Marcus Teal or Priya Adara, and Hargrove's attorney was already talking to the press about due process and presumption of innocence, and the system that had allowed a man like Hargrove to operate for 8 years was still largely intact and would require years of careful, unremarkable work to reform. But the truth was in the record now. It was spoken and attributed and documented. That wasn't nothing. That was, in fact, the whole thing. That Jolene caught her at the ambulance bay entrance at 3 p.m. "Lund wants to talk to you," she said. Emma looked at the doors. "About staying," Jolene added. "She doesn't know anything about—" "She knows you managed a mass casualty event, identified a hemothorax that cross-missed, and then single-handedly coordinated the evacuation of the North Wing during an incendiary threat, while also, apparently, disabling the device." Jolene paused. "And she knows there are federal agents who have said very specific things about your qualifications." "Marsh?" "Probably." Emma looked at the hospital. She'd been looking at it, in one way or another, since the windows blew in the night before. It looked different now. Still a building, still the slightly tired mid-tier hospital she'd walked into 18 months ago, looking for work that would let her be invisible. But different in the way places were different after you'd been through something in them. More real. More itself. She thought about being invisible. She thought about 18 months of careful smallness, the supply closets, the overlooked charts, the comments she hadn't answered, the competence she'd kept in the background because the background was safe and safe was what she needed. She thought about Bay 2 and the needle in her hand and Rel's blood pressure climbing back from the edge, and the specific truth that she'd known what to do because she was, in fact, the most qualified person in that building to do it. That knowledge had always been there. She'd just spent 3 years treating it like a liability instead of what it actually was. Okay, she said. And Patricia Lund was 61 years old and had been running Redwood Valley for 14 years, and she had the quality that the best administrators had. She got to the point. I've been told you hold qualifications that significantly exceed your current role, she said. I've been told they're working on the formal documentation, Emma said. Federal investigators have provided provisional verification. It's enough for my purposes. Lund looked at her across the desk. I have a trauma department that is currently without leadership. Cross is still. Cross is under administrative review and has been suspended from the leadership position. I have attending physicians, but no one currently qualified or positioned to serve as interim trauma chief. She paused. You're a nurse? Yes. You're licensed as a nurse. Whatever your other qualifications are, the current paperwork says RN. She said it matter-of-factly, not apologetically. I can't make you a physician, but I can create a senior clinical coordinator position that reports directly to me and has authority over trauma department protocol, staff deployment, and case escalation. Another pause. Until the documentation is resolved. Emma looked at her. And after? She said. That depends on what the documentation says, Lund said, and what you want. Emma sat with that. The question of what she wanted had been so abstract for so long that it was strange to have it be practical, specific, answerable. She thought about Gerald, who had told her his name while his lungs were filling. She thought about the child with the wrapped hands. She thought about 22-year-old panic attack and the burn patient she'd flagged, and 40 more people who had come through those doors because a refinery had exploded and this was the place they came to. She thought about the supply closet where she'd been pressing gauze against her own hand when the windows blew in. She thought about 18 months of careful invisibility and how it had ended specifically because she was too good at her job to stay invisible when it actually mattered. Yes, she said. Lund nodded. No fanfare, no ceremony, just the pragmatic acknowledgement of a decision made by two people who both had a lot of work ahead of them. There's going to be an administrative period, Lund said. Federal investigations, board reviews, the cross review. It will not be quiet. I know. And your situation, the official record of your existence, that will require attention. I'm working on it. Good. Lund stood, extended her hand. Welcome back, Miss Blake. Or whatever name we're going to be using. Emma shook it. Blake is fine, she said. At 4:30 p.m., she sat in her car in the hospital parking lot because she didn't have anywhere urgent to be for the first time in approximately 20 hours, and she sat with that. The drive home took 12 minutes. She knew every turn. She'd driven it enough that her hands knew it without her brain engaged. She'd driven it at the end of hundreds of shifts, invisible, unremarkable, a nurse going home in her car. She thought about Marcus Teal. She thought about Priya Adara. She thought about them with the specific clarity of people you stop protecting yourself from remembering, the specific face, the specific laugh, the specific way they'd occupied space in a world that no longer had them in it. She let herself think about them without the usual effort to look sideways. It hurt. It was supposed to hurt. The hurt was the correct response to the true thing. She thought about Lighthouse and the 48 hours before it, and the intelligence briefing she'd taken at face value because she trusted the system that built it. She thought about what Marsh had said. Hargrove signed the leak, personally, to protect a contract worth $400 million. Two people. $400 million. The math was obscene in its simplicity. She didn't feel the full weight of the anger. That would come later, probably, in the deposition room, in the testimony, in the long procedural months of a federal prosecution that would go on long after today. She'd feel it then. Right now, she felt the baseline reality of it, the settled fact of it. She also felt, underneath the anger and the grief and the exhaustion, something that she identified after a moment as the specific sensation of taking up space without apology. Not triumph, not vindication exactly, just the simple occupancy of who she actually was, not managed down to fit a room, not pressed into the corners of her own competence. Present, full-sized, done with the smallness. She had been, for 18 months, the nurse nobody looked at twice. She'd made herself that deliberately, carefully, for reasons that had made sense then. And underneath that, the whole time, she had been exactly what she'd always been. Someone who knew what to do when everything went wrong, and who did it, and who had never needed anyone to see it to know it was true. Last night, they'd seen it. She started the car. 6 weeks later, the headline in the regional paper read, "Federal prosecution opens against former D official in multi-million-dollar fraud case." The article covered 3 columns and mentioned the refinery explosion and the 43 injured and the criminal charges pending. It did not mention Hawthorne's hospital. It did not mention a nurse. Warren Hargrove's bail motion was denied. He remained in federal custody pending trial. His legal team filed 14 motions in the first week. 11 were denied. Richard Voss accepted a plea agreement in exchange for testimony against additional co-conspirators. The agreement reduced his exposure from 32 years to 14, which his attorney described as favorable. Nobody who had been in that hospital corridor agreed. The independent board review of Dr. Nathan Cross concluded its initial phase and issued a findings report that cited 3 specific incidents of clinical negligence during the mass casualty event, one of which had been flagged 3 times before action was taken. His leadership position was formally terminated. He retained his medical license with conditions including mandatory case review for all trauma presentations above a specified severity threshold for a period of 2 years. He was reportedly still at Redwood Valley, seeing patients, in a capacity that was smaller and more supervised than before. Emma heard about this from Jolene, who remained the most reliable news service in the building. Sergeant First Class Dominic Rell was discharged from military medical care after 7 weeks, with a prognosis that included full recovery of function and a strong recommendation for approximately 3 months of physical rehabilitation that he would ignore and then grudgingly comply with. He sent Emma a text at 6 a.m. on the day of his discharge that said walking out on my own, per the record, and nothing else, which she thought was possibly the most Rell sentence he'd ever produced. She replied, "Don't trip." He replied, "I never trip." She put her phone away and went to work. The formal restoration of Emma Blake's official record was completed on a Wednesday afternoon, processed by a DoD administrative unit, and cross-referenced with the FBI case file in the DoD Credential Repository, and it generated a document that was 8 pages long and very dry and established, for the official record, that Emma Claire Blake had not died 3 years ago, but had instead been operating under exigent circumstances in a manner consistent with the classified parameters of her service. The document also formally acknowledged, in language that was careful and institutional and as close to an apology as government language could get, that Operation Lighthouse had been compromised by intentional criminal action from within the Department of Defense, that the personnel lost during that operation had been failed by the system they served, and that the findings of the federal investigation had been entered into the official military record under the names of Staff Sergeant Marcus Teal and Specialist Priya Adara. Emma read the document in Lund's office, where it had been delivered by courier. She read it twice. She folded it and put it in her bag. She went back to the trauma bay. She had 3 patients waiting. One was a construction worker with a possible wrist fracture who was being brave about it. One was a 16-year-old with an asthma exacerbation who was frightened and needed someone to be calm near her. One was an older woman who had come in with chest pain and was insisting it was indigestion, which it was not. She went to the 16-year-old first. She sat at the edge of the bed, not the chair, the bed, which was not what you were supposed to do, but was what the situation required. And she said, "You're going to breathe easier in about 3 minutes. I'm going to stay right here. Watch me breathe and try to match it." The girl watched her, tried. The pattern began to even out. "There," Emma said. "There you go." She stayed. The thing they never taught in any medical training, not nursing school, not field medic courses, not any of the advanced clinical programs she'd completed across 2 different careers, was that the most useful thing a person could offer, sometimes, was simply not to leave. To stay in the room, to be present in the specific unflinching way of someone who had decided that this moment, this person, this situation, warranted their full attention. She'd spent 3 years making herself small and peripheral and easy to overlook. She was done with that. The girl's breathing evened out. Her shoulders dropped from her ears. The panic moved off her face, not completely, but enough. "Better?" Emma said. The girl nodded. "Good." Emma stood. "I'll be back in 3 minutes. If it gets harder before then, press that button and I'll come right away." She went to the next patient and then the next, and the corridor moved around her the way corridors did. Patients and techs and the overlapping rhythms of a department that was, day by day, finding its footing again under new leadership that nobody had asked for, but everybody, gradually, was adjusting to. She was not perfect at this job. She made calls that turned out to be wrong, though rarely, and when she did, she owned them directly and without theater. She had days when the fatigue accumulated past what was manageable, and she made small mistakes that she caught herself and corrected. She had days when the memory of Lighthouse arrived in the middle of a routine task, and she had to stand in a supply closet for 60 seconds and breathe before she could continue. She had those days and she worked through them, and she kept going, not because it was easy, but because she discovered in a hospital corridor during the worst night this building had seen in years that the gap between easy and worth doing was where she'd always lived. The woman who had been dismissed, reduced, and overlooked for 18 months, for years before that, in the specific way institutions dismiss the people who see what they refuse to see, was still that woman. That hadn't been transformed by one night. She was still the same person who had pressed gauze against her own hand in a supply closet and listened to a trauma chief call her a glorified bedpan technician from 6 feet away without responding. But she'd also learned, or relearned, or finally let herself believe, that being seen was not the same thing as being real. She had been real the entire time. The seeing was just the system catching up. The system caught up slowly and badly and required enormous effort from the people it had failed. But it caught up. And sometimes, not always, not cleanly, not without cost, the person who was dismissed turned out to be the only one in the building who knew what to do. She'd known. She'd done it. The rest in time had followed.